Thank you, Malaprops, for having me, and thank you to Amy Reed for inviting me to do this event with her. I'm a massive fan of both Malaprops and Amy, so this is very exciting for me. Now to introduce Amy. Amy Reed is the author of 11 highly acclaimed books for young adults, including Beautiful, Clean, The Nowhere Girls, and now her latest, Tell Me My Name. She's received starred reviews from Kirkus School Library Journal and Booklist, and she's had her work optioned for television by Amazon. Her latest book, Tell Me My Name, has been described as We Were Liars meets Speak in a gender-flipped Great Gatsby. It's received a rapturous reception. In one starred review, School Library Journal called it immersive and smartly written. In another starred review, the BCCB described it as possessed of as much Hitchcockian suspense as Fitzgerald's tarnished glitz. And some guy with the doofus name of Jeff Zentner called it a harrowing, prescient vision of the near future and a compelling and propulsive thriller with sentences that gleam like polished steel. Amy lives and creates in Asheville, North Carolina, a magical place that I once myself called home. So everybody, let's all give it up in the cloistered privacy of our own homes for the brilliant Amy Reed. And everybody get those questions ready, shoot them in there because we're going to try to answer as many of them as we possibly can. Amy, take it away.
Thank you, Jeff. That was a very lovely introduction. I guess I can just start by saying a little bit about the book. You did a very great little synopsis there. But yeah, so it's a psychological thriller, which is a new thing for me for sure. And it's a near future gender flipped feminist retelling of The Great Gatsby that focuses on two girls, Fern and Ivy. Fern is the narrator. She's kind of the Nick Carraway character, kind of quiet, kind of meek. And she is sort of waiting for her life to start. And she's waiting for something to just give her meaning and direction. And then Ivy arrives, and she's kind of, her life has kind of followed that story that we all kind of know of, that teen star, right, who grew up too fast and burned out. And she is just getting out of rehab, and she moved to this little island to recuperate and recover. And she befriends Fern, and the book it's about their friendship. It's about them trying to figure out who they are in this crazy world they live in. That's about 50 years in the future. And it's a world that is very polarized, which we all know something about, right? And their little island is, it's a gated community. It's for people who work for this giant corporation called A Corp that runs everything. It's very wealthy, very privileged, but the rest of the world is on fire, very literally. And the book just kind of follows them as they navigate their experience in and out of this world, and as they sort of dig deep in themselves and try to figure out who they are and what their needs are in the middle of kind of, as you said, this tarnished glitz, right? If you're familiar with Gatsby, it's about excess and parties and extravagance, and there's a lot of that, but there's an edge to it always, and there's something hiding beneath it that's sometimes pretty scary. So without giving too much away, because it is a pretty twisty book, and so there are some surprises in it. That's kind of the gist there.
Amy, did you want to read a little bit from it?
Yes, I do. I'm going to read a few pages from the beginning. And just as a note, there are some chapters in it that are told in fragments. And so if this sounds like it's kind of all over the place, it's on purpose. And also, I apologize if you hear some snoring. That's my dog on the floor. I told her to be quiet for this, but she does not listen to me.
What kind of dog we dealing with here, Amy?
Hold on.
Let's see that. We got to see the dog. Come on. We got to see the dog.
This is Peanut. She's 12 years old and she snores while she's awake. And I think that every Zoom event should always feature pets.
I agree. She looks like a peanut. She looks like a peanut. I might get my dogs up here if we have time.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to read the first few pages. Ferns are older than dinosaurs. They've survived by growing under things, made hardy by their place in the shadows, sucking up mud. Fern, barely even a plant. Ferns don't make seeds, don't flower. They propagate with spores knocked off their fronds by passing creatures or strong winds. They sit there, forest deep, waiting to be touched. Papa said Daddy could have any house he wanted, so we picked an old abandoned church at the end of a gravel road in the middle of the forest on an island. Papa says it's a money pit. Daddy says it's a work in progress. Papa says it was Daddy's revenge for making them move for his career. Papa says Daddy likes to make things hard for no reason. Daddy says it builds character. Papa says I probably have brain damage from all the sawdust and paint fumes I inhaled as a baby. Daddy sometimes calls the house his other child. Their bickering soothes me. That they argue about such things reminds me we have nothing big to worry about. We're the opposite of dysfunctional. We're real live unicorns. Commodore Island is 9 miles long and 5 miles wide. In the summer, it's overrun with tourists, day trippers from Seattle with their itineraries of the famous bakery and fish restaurant, the little boutiques and artisan cheese shop, all the old buildings preserved like a retro small town time capsule of family-owned businesses. You can barely see the tiny A Corp logo on their signs. Sometimes the tourists rent kayaks. Sometimes they go for hikes in the nature preserve at the center of the island. They walk around the muddy lake and take home photos and mosquito bites as souvenirs. They drive Olympic Road in its lumpy oval circuit, the mansions and luxury condos rising over them from the shore and stacking up the hill, each with its own view of the sound, before the island's middle gives way to forest. The tourists slow at the gates of our more famous residence, stopping traffic to take picture of the rare wild deer crossing the road. They get their little taste of point, of our tiny unscathed bubble where you can almost believe the rest of the world isn't falling apart. Then they return to their gated communities in the city. There have been no deer in Seattle for a long time. People can afford beauty here. The rich always get to keep a little of what they destroy. The tourists always end up at my work at some point on their trip. Island, home, and garden. They buy our signature t-shirts with the otters holding hands. Everyone loves otters holding hands. Even though otters haven't been spotted here in a couple decades, not since the big oil spill off the coast of Vancouver Island. My fathers are some of the few parents on the island who believe that a work ethic must be built. It is not something that can be inherited like wealth. I am the only person I know with a part-time summer job. I'm also the only person who works on this island who actually lives on this island. Everyone who lives here either works for A Corp headquarters in Seattle or they don't need to work. Everyone who works here lives in the giant subsidized housing complexes across the bridge to the west on the peninsula, those miles of identical high-rise boxes strategically built on the other side of a hill so they won't cheapen the view of anyone on the island. Buses full of workers arrive around the clock for shifts at the shops and restaurants, the grocery store, to work on gardens and remodels of houses, in and out, back and forth, like the tide. I work while everyone else my age plays. I work while they travel or while their parents travel and they stay home to party and be tended to by housekeepers and nannies who have their own families across the country waiting for checks to arrive, in the states that have no jobs because of the floods and the fires and the poisoned earth. I work while my best friend Lily is in Taiwan visiting family all summer. I sell orchids and fake antique watering cans to tourists and housewives, waiting for my real life to start. But then there's a rumor of a new arrival. Moving trucks at the bottom of my hill, the gate across Olympic Road opens. Not the usual executive rich, not the CEOs and CFOs and COOs and CTOs of the various departments of A Corp. A star. My sleepy town has woken up. Rumor is she just got out of treatment. Exhaustion, they call it, which could mean anything. Drugs, alcohol, eating disorder, sex, gambling, self-harm, mental illness. It's not so remarkable. Some kids on the island make these trips more often than summer camp. Or she could just be tired. I'm tired, Papa says. I wish I could go somewhere for exhaustion. Daddy rolls his eyes in the way that means, I love you, but you can be so insensitive. Then Papa rolls his eyes in the way that means, I love you, but you can be too sensitive. Should we bring our new neighbors a pie or something, Daddy says. That's just in the movies, Papa says. And how would we even get through the gate to give them the pie, I say. You sound just like your father, Daddy says. Meow, says our cat, Go Tommy. One thing Papa and Daddy agree on is that Commodore Island is full of a bunch of people with money trying to look like they don't have money. Seattle rich is a special kind of rich. It's jeans and hiking boots and expensive high-tech moisture-wicking shirts for people who never sweat. I can feel something different before I see them. A shift in energy, a sucking toward. They are not Seattle rich. They are big sunglasses and big purses rich, loud, bright printed sundresses against flawless bronze skin, sparkling jewels and heeled sandals. Nobody here wears heels unless they go off the island. They're practically matching. I don't know who is copying whom. Mother and daughter. From a distance, they could be twins. We are good at leaving rich people alone. They walk among us every day. Most are the kind of rich that is not famous, though occasionally you might hear their names in the news with words like fiscal quarter and acquisitions and international market. They are not faces. They are not voices. They are not entire bodies and stories we've known since we were young. They are just names made out of money. But this girl is made out of a different kind of money. A boy asks for her autograph. Her smile is pure oxygen and sunlight. All the flowers in the store turn to her and open their petals. For a moment, I am seated. I have fruit.
That was absolutely lovely. And as I was sitting there listening to you read that, I was thinking about how I got to read this many months ago. It was as a bound manuscript. It wasn't in this beautiful form we have now. And one of the things that struck me so deeply about this story is just on a craft level, the sheer level of craft on display here. It's written in these kind of stark, brutal, beautiful, poetic sentences. They're very short and they land like punches. And I was wondering, who are some of your literary influences? What are some of the ingredients of that writing is my first question. And my second question is, how did you develop the voice in this story? Because there is a very distinctive voice. What were some of the choices that underlie, I don't know whether it's laid or lied, but underpin that voice in this story?
Oh, that's a good question. As far as influences go, I think like the books that I read around the time when I was starting to work on this that just blew my mind and completely changed me as a writer were, first of all, Her Body and Other Parties, I think, by Carmen Marita Machado. Is that what it's called? I'm so bad at
I've got it right. Her Body and Other Parties.
Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen. I will go get it.
I'll go get mine.
So, okay, this is a book of short stories that I just think everyone needs to read. It changed my life as a writer.
Great book. Great book.
And the way that she, what I loved so much was just like her voice. Like every story in there has a different voice, but it's still very much hers. And the way that she could write completely outside of the male gaze. And I just can't, I'm not going to spend my whole time talking about that, but basically like that I think was the most influential book as far as like the style that I developed for mine. Um, yeah, so that was definitely there. And as far as like developing the voice, I don't know, like I never know where the voices come from. And I think that like I I I I tend to be known as a very voicey writer. And it's just something that is always, um, I think because it is so much a part of who I am as a writer, I don't necessarily think a lot about it. It just happens. And I know that that's a terrible answer and people hate hearing that kind of thing. But it just sort of fell into place, I think, because of the subject matter, because of the setting, because it is such a stark world. The voice followed that, and the voice does change too throughout it. Like I think it morphs depending on like what's happening and where Fern is as a character and her psychology. Sometimes she sounds really innocent, and then sometimes she sounds really, really jaded, and it kind of, her voice changes with her psychology.
Well, I thought it was just kind of perfectly executed. It really felt like the voice followed the needs of the story, and so it all felt very organic. There's nothing kind of more excruciating than reading a forced voice that isn't the right voice for a story. And this one, the voice was just perfect. So let me ask you to just take kind of a big step back, just big picture, and talk about where did this story come from? What were the seeds that grew into this story?
Well, it first came from just rereading The Great Gatsby a couple of years ago. I live in Asheville, right? And I think, you know what I think actually happened was I went on a cheesy bus tour, and we like went past like where Zelda Fitzgerald had been in the hospital that burned down. And I was like, oh, I live in the place where, like, you know, the Fitzgeralds lived, and maybe I should read Great Gatsby again. I think I remember liking that 20 years ago.
Never read it, by the way. I've only
Yeah.
read yeah, as far as I'm concerned, you
Oh,
wrote The Great Gatsby. So
well, thank you. No, but I mean, I really would like, I'm so curious what you would think about it. Um, because it is like considered like the great American novel, right? Like it's the canon. And so I was like, I wonder what I think about that now. And I read it with no real intention of like writing an adaptation. I was just reading it as a reader. And I was like, oh, there are things I love. Like I love just the exploration of the American dream and the flawed sort of the flaws of the American dream and greed and excess and striving that ended up destroying Gatsby, right? So I loved that. But then I also was like, this was not written for me. This was not written for, you know, my like the immigrant side of my family. This wasn't written for me as a woman. This wasn't, I don't know. So there was things that I was like, I want to explore these themes and I want to add myself into them. I want to add my friends into the story. I want to add the people who are not represented in the story and see how that shifts the themes. And then also, you know, put it in a setting that is now plus, you know, 50 years in the future of what could potentially happen, and like set it in this understanding of like things are a little bit different than they were 100 years ago, and our understanding of things are different, and like our understanding of the like influence of certain things that were just sort of taken for granted in Fitzgerald's time, like we're seeing the consequences of so many things. And so yeah, it was like I wanted to explore the things that Gatsby did really well and also the things that Gatsby missed.
I feel like, okay, and I'll say, you know, obviously haven't read Gatsby, but what I know of it, it feels like it's a book that invites, that sort of calls for reinterpretation. It calls for people to check in on it and to check that vision and sort of say, where are we at on this? And who is a participant now in this story, now that we're a few more years down the road from its writing. It's interesting. I'm seeing now that it's become public domain. I think it entered the public domain like this year or something.
Yeah, it was like
that.
a month ago or something.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty funny.
Yeah, people, and so people are now writing stories. There's a book out there called Nick that follows Nick Carraway that looks interesting, but it does seem like this is sort of the perfect time to revisit the themes of Gatsby and take stock. Where are we in terms of kind of the American spirit? So you mentioned that you wanted to bring more of yourself to this story as a woman, as the product of an immigrant family. Can you talk a little bit about how you populated the story with yourself in this?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I have been a very autobiographical writer, especially at the beginning of my career. And I wouldn't say that this book is at all me, like these characters aren't me, but the book deals with the things that I care about. And so in that way, I think my work is always personal, right? And so like what I was interested in like the gender flipping was like, how do young women kind of internalize this idea of the American dream and striving and ambition and success? And in particular with Ivy's character, I wanted to explore that in terms of fame and being somebody who was a product from a very early age. And something that I've just been obsessed with for a while now is just this idea of where do we get our sense of worth? And for so many of us, it comes externally, right? It comes from like what people think about us, how successful we are, what we've achieved, how much money we have, what we own. And for Ivy, her sense of worth came from those things, and also from being like hypersexualized by the entertainment industry. And I wanted to explore like the very devastating effects of that, which I think so many women experience in their own way. Where like we're not all child stars, we're not all famous, but I think that we all understand that feeling of being a product and being objectified and our worth being based on our use to men. And so that was something I really wanted to explore as far as like the gender part of things goes. And also just I really wanted to like investigate more the people who were left out of the Gatsby story. I think like the kind of the secondary characters, the people who were not wealthy, they were not given much. They weren't honored. I think their stories and their agency were not honored, and I really wanted to, I think, make them more real and really like write them into the story in a way that made them matter.
So you've used the phrase American dream a few times tonight. Can you talk about what does the American dream mean to you? Is it a thing? Does it exist? Is it an attainable thing, or is it kind of largely a myth? What do you think?
I actually wrote a very impassioned guest blog for Teen Librarian Toolbox that posted today. I don't think it's what they wanted, but I was like in a state when I was like, okay, I'm gonna write about capitalism and I'm gonna write about shame and like blah, like I don't know, I can get worked up. But so I think like the idea of the American dream that I was sort of investigating with this book was just that craving for more, like just that I think we all are brought up with this idea that like a good life is one in which you succeed, which you like move up, you like get things, you have all of this stuff to show that you are a worthwhile person, that you like deserve to exist because you are doing something. And I think that like we just take that for granted, right? Like that like ambition is a good thing, but we don't really stop to question where is that coming from and what is the motivation for that. And I think a lot of times for so many of us, it is rooted in shame, and it's rooted in this place of like believing that like we are not enough, right? That like somehow we need to earn our right to exist in this world by proving that we are somehow worthy. And I think like the original Gatsby showed that, right? Like Jay Gatsby was born of modest means, and he just had this obsession to make it and to be rich and to like have all the things, and he did all sorts of stuff in order to get that. And then, you know, he got it, and life was not that great for him. And so yeah, like that is something I really wanted to look at, and just like the greed and the delusion of um just always having to have more, and what we're trying to like cover up with all of those things. And just the phenomenon of craving in everything we do, the craving for fame and attention and love and recognition, all of these things that we're looking to complete us in some way. And that like all of these things are a form of addiction in some way. And like we're never going to be high enough. We're never going to have enough. And I think the girls in this book, they do a lot trying to like achieve some feeling of enoughness, and they realize that what they're doing is maybe not the right way to do it.
Yeah, as you were talking about that, I was really kind of reflecting on the zero sumness of capitalism, which is such a driver of the American dream, and that zero sumness kind of necessarily leads to winners and losers, and it's not, in my mind, a sustainable trajectory for any society to have so many people striving for the same pot of limited resources. And it's a pot of limited resources that requires us to sacrifice, you know, kind of so much of our humanity along the way to get to it. I think that's one of the things that makes Tell Me My Name so compelling, is the way it interrogates that dark side of the American dream, that the way that some people are winners and losers, not just some people, but our world itself.
Mhm.
While we're on this topic, a great question came in. What led you to decide to set a story that is largely a critique of the American dream in the future rather than a very critiquable present?
I think part of it was just curiosity. I wanted to explore what it would be like to write speculative fiction, because it's something that I love to read, and I've never really tried to write. But I think part of it too is that like um, setting something in the future is such a great microscope on the present, because you can select the things you want to highlight by, you know, imagining the consequence of what is happening now, right? And so I think you can really show what the reality is now by kind of just magnifying it by 50 years and seeing like the kind of logical consequence of what we're doing now, right? Because like for me, like the best science fiction is always a critique of what's happening right now, right? Like it's um, setting something in the future is just kind of a really, really great way to just magnify what's happening right now.
I really love a near future setting, and I wish there were more stories set in a near future setting. I read your book, and then I watched this series on HBO. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It was a British series called like Year After Year, something like that. and it takes place like 6 years in the future. And I think these near future stories are so compelling for precisely the reason that you identify, which is that you can so clearly identify the threads, the threads, the saplings that are growing right now that lead to these outcomes. Where if you watch something that's like wildly in the future, I almost said Star Wars, even though Star Wars is explicitly long, long ago. When you watch something that is like very far in the future, a lot of the decisions we make now kind of become this abstraction. Whereas in your story, you saw it in a very real way. This is a great point to bring in another great question that we got in the chat. You really nailed the near future setting. It felt so real. How long ago did you conceive of this world where the people on the coasts had to become refugees in safe places in the US?
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I feel like I always have the worst answers when anyone asks me about like my writing process, because it's such this like organic thing that just kind of happens. I don't know. That's a terrible answer too, because it makes it sound like there's no work involved. But I think it's just like I think as I was writing this, I just sort of looked at now and asked like, so if I'm looking at all these things right now that scare the hell out of me, what's like the worst thing that could happen? And that was sort of how I developed this world, right? Like, what's the worst thing that could happen with climate change? Okay, how about like all of the, like, and there's parts of the South that are being overrun by like white supremacist militias, and there are like measles outbreaks because there are like a bunch of people who aren't vaccinating, and there's all of these things that are just like kind of the obvious what is going to happen based on what's happening right now. And also, like, what's really strange is that I finished writing this book over a year ago, like before COVID, before a lot of like the Black Lives Matter protests, and everything. It's almost like all of that stuff is kind of happening in this book without, it's just like, yes, of course, all of these things were going to happen.
Do you think that the future you posit in your book is an inevitability?
It is if we don't change stuff, and I think that the best like speculative fiction is also a warning, right? It's like, this is what could happen if we don't get our shit together. Sorry for swearing. But yeah, I mean, I think like this book was really like part of the process of me writing with this book was like really about me kind of facing a lot of my fears of all of the things, and just exploring like how far do these fears go, and like what happens at the end of them, and can I be okay even if the worst things I can imagine could happen. And I think that's also like what these characters are sort of asking too. And I think in exploring my fears of like the world on fire, I realized that like no matter what happens on the outside, that like there are things that are still solid that we can access, and that there are things with each other that are still true and real and good. And that helped me sort of process a lot of the stuff that's going on right now.
So you mentioned this a little earlier, and I'm glad you did because I wanted to talk about it. You mentioned addiction and how addiction figures into this story. So there's a drug in this story called freedom. Can you talk a little bit about what that means within the context of this story, what it symbolizes, what you wanted to say about addiction in this story?
Yeah, so it kind of I talked a little bit about it already, just in like context of the American dream and striving and all that. But this particular drug that I invented it's not for really the purpose of getting high. It's what it does is it eliminates shame. And so like in the book, it was like originally try it like they tried to make it for like, you know, trauma survivors and blah, 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 but then it ended up being like a huge black market success. And that, you know, I think was really a comment on the fact that like so many of us are ruled by shame, and that it is the source of so much of our suffering. And like not only like there's like that drug, but then of course there's also all sorts of other ways that these characters find to escape reality. And you know, I don't know. I always write about addiction in some way or another, except for maybe in the Nowhere Girls, I didn't really, but pretty much all of my books have to do with addiction in some way. Because it's, you know, like I said before, it's like, it's the thing that I care about. It's the thing that I want to write about. And it's the thing that I think, even if you're somebody who has not experienced being addicted to like some sort of like drug or alcohol, we all understand that feeling of craving, and we all understand the feeling of wanting to chase things that feel good and run away from things that feel bad. And um and we are all so stuck there most of the time, in just trying to change our feelings and trying to like have something or get something or accomplish something that's gonna feel better than we feel like right now. And I think in this story and in so many people's stories, shame is so directly a part of that. In addition to trauma, I mean, they're all so interconnected. And that's another one of the many things that I tried to tackle in this book and hopefully succeeded at.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question while you're on this kind of line of thought is how does mental health and mental illness, how do those factor into this story? What were you interrogating with taking on those subjects?
Um, well, I mean, I don't want to give too much away, but I think I really wanted to investigate trauma and um, the effects on a mind and a heart when that trauma isn't cared for, and when, you know, a person's way of coping is to find various ways to run away from it, and when they are not given a container to like deal with it and to heal from it. Um and like that is, those are the demons that the character Ivy is dealing with in this story. And like, how can she live in this world that has hurt her so much? And how can she live in her own body that has hurt so much? And how does she have relationships with other people where she isn't replaying um, all of those ways she's been hurt? And yeah, I think I want to like be really careful to not like give anything away. So that's what I'll say about that.
Great. So we're currently, and maybe we see a little bit of the light at the end of the tunnel, but we're currently living through something that could easily be a feature in Tell Me My Name. We're living through a pandemic where we're quarantined. We're speaking this way because of this. How have you been spending quarantine? What has that experience been like for you? Has it affected your creativity? Have you drawn any reflections from it? I'm always curious to hear what creative people are making of this sort of lost year in our world.
Um, Whenever anyone asks me like how I'm doing in quarantine, I immediately like feel really, really guilty because I feel like I have so much privilege and I'm so lucky to have had a much easier experience than most people. I think part of it, like the kind of adjusting wasn't as hard just because I'm somebody who has been working from home for a really long time. I joke about like, I'm an only child who like grew up in the middle of nowhere. And so I'm used to being alone, and I'm an introvert and I like just staying in my house in my pajamas and blah, blah, blah. And so I think there's like a level of comfort with this situation that I'm just naturally kind of, um, I don't know, it's just maybe a little bit easier for me. And I also like live somewhere where there's a lot of outdoor space, and my daughter has been able to go to school most of the time. And so, yeah, like life is okay. It's scary a lot of the time, but it's okay. And as far as like creativity goes, I've just sort of been plugging along. I I have definitely not been writing about anything to do with quarantine. I'm trying to write about sort of a world after. Um, and I think a lot of writers are dealing with this problem of like, how do we write and how do we reference this time when we have no idea what things are going to look like in a few years? Like, it's really hard to predict the world and how to write a world. Yeah.
So a question came in, how has it changed the way you work, and has it changed the work itself?
Hmm.
Well, for me, I'll tell you, for me, it's changed it in a very odd way where I write my books on the bus to and from work on my phone, and I don't have a bus commute anymore. I work from home now, so now that creative space that I had carved out of my life that was kind of a sacred space is just sort of gone, and I haven't figured out a consistent way to replace it yet.
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely miss my coffee shop, my like neighborhood coffee shop that I would go to. But then I also realized that like I didn't do a whole lot of work there. I was mostly people watching and like looking on Twitter. But
What was your coffee shop?
Odds Cafe on
Oh
Hayward
yeah.
Road. Yeah.
Yep.
They're great. They have very good coffee and very nice baristas. Um, but uh but I think that I've just gotten a lot more disciplined. Like if I'm stuck in this house, I have to like carve out like what room what each room is for. And like, I at my desk I edit and revise, but then I have this chair I sit in for when I draft. And then like if I'm like just sort of doing other stuff like emails or whatever, I go sit on my couch. And like I don't know, it's just I have my little I've I've found ways to compartmentalize my life in different spots so that I have little like, I don't know,
What
spots
what
for things.
what spot are you in right now? Is this your writing spot you're in?
This is mostly my like revising spot
Okay.
or my
Do
like Zoom visit spot.
do you have any special little totems or items that you keep in that spot that you can show us? Can you do a little show and tell?
I don't know. I'm not like I really like having a super super clean desk. So
Okay.
I mean I have some pens. Oh, I have this. This is a very important thing that I use to like roll out my hamstrings. I sit on that ball. That's like the most interesting thing about my desk.
There we go. That works. That works. What's next for you? What are you working on? Can you talk about it at all?
Yeah, I feel so I never like talking about works in progress. Like I'm not going to say a lot about it, but I am working on my first novel for adults, which is very terrifying because I've been writing YA for 12 years now, and I don't know if I have I don't know. I've always kind of felt like my voice was a little too adult for YA, but then I feel like it's a little too YA for adult, and I don't know where I fit, and I'm having like a identity crisis around like all that. But yeah, I finished a really bad draft, and I'm now like kind of going through and trying to turn it into a book. So that's what I've been working on.
I'm excited. I'm going to go back from, I started to move into some more kind of big picture questions, but I'm going to go back into a more specific question about Tell Me My Name, because I realized I've forgotten to ask it. How did you conceive of the characters of Fern and Ivy? Can you talk a little bit about that process, how those characters became people in your mind?
Yes. I also have to remember to be very careful about not giving anything away. Um, so I Fern was the first one. She's based on the Nick Carraway character of Gatsby, who's the narrator. And I was really interested in this idea of a passive narrator, where the person who's telling the story isn't actually who the story is about. And so I kind of wanted to explore that. And I wanted to explore also like what I always saw as the homoerotic undertones of Gatsby, which are so obvious to me. Like it was just so obvious to me that Nick was like totally in love with Jay Gatsby. But I guess a lot of people don't see that, I guess, because they're not looking for it or something. And so I wanted to explore that too. And like Fern is like also kind of in love with Ivy, and how does that kind of change their relationship? And I really wanted to like create a character who is just genuinely from a healthy family. I thought that that would be a great experiment because I had never done it before. And so I made her just these perfect dads who were so like loving and present in her life and so supportive, and she had such like a secure home life. And I that was just like a perfect contrast to this character of Ivy, who her life was the exact opposite. And so they kind of were two sides of, you know, a life, and showed like the kind of two extremes of experience that a young woman could have in this world that they live in, and how they complement each other and how they need each other because of what each other lacks.
Awesome. Okay, everybody, get your questions ready. Limber up those fingers. Get ready to enter them into chat because we've got a few minutes left for questions. First, though, I'm going to ask you one more question here, and I'll probably think of others, so it's not going to be my last question, probably. But for this question, there are some rules, okay? The rule is you have to set aside all modesty, humility, all self-effacement. You can't answer this question in a jokey way, okay? It's the rule. What do you like the most about Amy Reed books? What are your favorite part of Amy Reed books? Remember, no self-effacement, no jokey. You got to answer this question dead on.
This is an impossible request.
It is not an impossible request. You can do this. You have it.
I think the honesty, maybe, like just the rawness and the fearlessness in exploring what hurts us, and not sugarcoating things, and like I think I take a lot of pride in honoring different stories, you know, not the ones that we usually see in a lot of YA, you know. It's really important to me to write stories for the kind of kid that I was, who was like, you know, I grew up a little too fast and I was kind of lost and a little bit self-destructive, and I never saw my story told in a book, really. And I think that like if I had, it would have been really powerful. And so yeah, that's something I feel good about.
Well, hey, look at that. You perfectly answered an impossible question. What do you know? You've done the impossible. We've got a question here. Have you seen Moxie, based on the book by the amazing Jennifer Mathieu? They are reading The Great Gatsby and talk about how it's about a rich white dude. Thank you for writing this book. And that question comes to us from Jennifer Mathieu. Okay.
Does it really? No, it doesn't.
No. Oh. I hope Jennifer's watching tonight. We both love Jennifer, right?
I love Jennifer. She's great. I have not seen the movie yet. I haven't been able to, and I'm really sad about it because I love Moxie, and I'm so happy for her. And it's funny, actually, I just did a couple of school visits with Jennifer's high school AP English classes. So that was really fun. And we talked, they had just finished reading The Great Gatsby in her class. And so we talked about it, and we talked about Tell Me My Name. But yeah, it's funny because like our books came out at like exactly the same time. And it's just such a comment on like the fact that like those stories were so desperately needed. you know. And it's just really exciting that there's a movie now about, you know, teenage girls joining together and fighting the patriarchy. Yeah, and I'm so incredibly thrilled for her, and I need to see that movie.
Yeah, me too. It's great. We watched it the other night. It's a lot of fun. I called in a favor with Jennifer, and she's going to speak to the rock camp for teenage girls that I volunteer for,
Oh,
Southern Girls Rock
perfect.
Camp. So that's going to be great.
Yeah.
We've got a question here, and this is a great question. I was wondering about this myself. Is there an intentional connection with plants/climate with the names Fern and Ivy?
You know what's so funny? I feel like I get questions like that all the time about all my books where like somebody notices a super cool connection or metaphor and they're like, how'd you come up with that? And I'm like, I did not do that. You know, like I like you mentioned it. I'm like, wow, that is awesome. Like a really good writer must have figured that out. But I did like that was not I didn't think of that. Somebody else did it and I just typed it. Yeah, I don't know like where I'm so bad at answering these questions because I don't know where it came from. I think that like I think like so nature was a big part of things. Like where Fern lives is in the forest, and I left out a part that sort of describes just all of the like the just the rich life in her little pocket of the world, and it's just this kind of oasis of growth and life and plants, and it's like a very stark contrast to what's happening in the rest of the world where climate change is just, you know, ruining everything. And so I really wanted her to kind of her name to personify that experience. And, you know, and I think of ferns, they grow in wet places. They're like the sign of a place that's just full of life and rich earth. And then ivy is like, you know, the plant that it just never dies, and it's so resilient, but also it gets into things and it kind of just destroys things. And so that was kind of what I was thinking about with like the kind of symbolism of their names. But then of course they relate to what's happening on a larger scale. And you know, now that I'm thinking about it, it's like these lives, these two plant lives are so persistent. Like ferns have been around, you know, since before the dinosaurs, and they keep going. And these girls keep going despite everything that's happening.
Ferns are one of those plants that just by their very shape, they're very transporting for me in the sense that when I see them, it's like kind of an instantly magical experience, like seeing a palm tree. Like if I see a palm tree, like I'm instantly on vacation. When I see a fern, when I used to go hiking in Asheville, you know, I'd see ferns in the woods and it was just so beautiful. I was instantly in like Lothlorien from Lord of the Rings or something. It was
Yeah.
really cool and magical. Speaking of which, we got a question. How did moving to Asheville change your writing? Did it at all?
Hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, I think when I moved to Asheville, I like made a decision to kind of write full time. I had worked in publishing before and then decided to like just become a full-time writer when I had my daughter. And so being here and kind of like just seeing myself as a writer, and also just being in a place where the pace of life is a lot slower and it's not as demanding of my energy. And I found that my nervous system was a lot calmer and my anxiety was a lot better. And so that has allowed me to kind of, I think, become a more embodied writer. And also, I think I've started taking my time a little bit more with my books. I think before I was like really determined to like write a book a year and like get them out there. And like, I don't feel that same drive. Like I now want to give myself more time to explore and really, really go deep with what I do.
So I don't think I knew, or maybe I just forgot that you were in publishing. What did you do in publishing?
I was an assistant to a publisher, and we did like nonfiction K through 12 education books for educators. So
Wow.
very, very different than what I do now. But it's funny. I was just thinking about that. Like part of my job was I would go to all these different educational conferences and like work in the exhibit hall schlepping books. And like I remember one year I went to NCTE and like my boss she was such a wonderful boss, and she like let me take a break so I could go to a panel and see some YA authors. And then, however many years later, I am one of those authors at NCTE at Allen, and like it's really cool to just see like the progression of a life and like going from schlepping books in the exhibit hall to like being one of the books that sold. So yeah.
Very cool. We've got a question. What is involved in changing genre or writing to a different readership?
Oh man, I don't know. If you find out, tell me. I think for me now, I'm just like, I'm trying not to worry about like the market and all that stuff. I'm just trying to write a good book. And for me, like, I'm finding like the story is about a woman who's in her 40s, right? Which is over twice as old as the characters I usually write about. But the stories they still are the same core story. They're still rites of passage. They're still coming of age. They're still about people transforming. And so the actual like writing itself is not all that different. It's just trying to see things through the eyes of somebody who's in a different part of their life. Um, yeah, as far as like actually selling this book, I have no idea. I'm trying not to worry about that right now.
Well, we're excited to read it whenever we get to. So I know I am.
Thank you. Oh, there's Charles.
There's Charles. Hey. Thank you both. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Amy. What a wonderful talk that was. I can't wait to read Tell Me My Name. And if you haven't ordered the book already, now is a friendly reminder to do so. The link is in the chat, as well as links to all of Amy's other books, Jeff's and the pre-order link for Jeff's book coming out this summer.
Oh, and can I just say one thing? I'm coming into the store tomorrow to sign books, and so if you order one now, I can sign it and personalize it if you like put a note in your order.
Yes, do that. Thank you again. Thank you for doing that, Amy. That's always really nice when authors do that. And thank all of you for attending. What a great turnout. What a great discussion. It was all thanks to you. So on behalf of the store, thank both of you, and thank you all, the viewers.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Amy. This was an honor. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.